I know it's hard for you to understand why anyone would want to kill themselves. It's hard for me, too, now. But it was all I could think about. Not whether or not I was going to do it, but how and when. They say I was suffering from depression and that I just couldn't reason properly. All I know is that I was in some kind of a stupor. It was like I was in a trance. I lost interest in most things. I just didn't feel like eating, taking exercise, or even talking. I just wanted to be by myself. I remember just sitting and staring at the walls of my cell. I don't even remember deciding that I should kill myself, but I do remember just accepting it, like it was something I had to do. And I did the rollover. I tied the laces of my shoes around my neck and hooked them on the bottom of my bunk. Then I lay down on the floor on my back. And then I just rolled over onto my stomach. I remember feeling really good before I blacked out, like I had finally done it. They say a CO came by and found me and saved my life. I'm glad to be alive now. It's like I came out of a fog. I'd be dead now if that CO hadn't come by and saved me just in time.
This incident could have been one of the most traumatic events in a detention or correctional facility, a suicide. Frequently, a suicide places a facility under the spotlight of public criticism. Even when they have followed recognized policies and procedures, staff often have strong guilt feelings. They will ask, what could we have done better to prevent the suicide? Regardless of the circumstances surrounding the suicide, there will often be questions as to whether reasonable care was provided. In recent years, relatives of offenders who committed suicide have filed an increasing number of lawsuits. In fact, about 8 or 9 of every 10 suicides results in lawsuits. Many of the lawsuits have been successful because most of the suicides in custody could have been prevented. That is the goal of this videotape, to give each correctional employee the knowledge and skills necessary to prevent suicides. One of the first issues that needs to be addressed is just how big a problem are suicides in corrections. Well, statistics show us that there is a much higher rate of suicide in custody than in the community. Also, suicide is second to AIDS as the cause of death of those incarcerated. Pre-trial detainees in police lockups and jail facilities have the highest rate of suicides, 9 times that in the community. Those entering these facilities are high risk for suicide because a high percentage of them may be under the influence of alcohol and or street drugs when they are arrested. Many are experiencing the trauma of arrest and incarceration for the first time. Many have a history of mental, emotional, social, and economic problems. Juveniles pose special problems in regard to suicide. In juvenile correctional facilities, suicide is now the leading cause of death, with homicides being number 2. Also, the incidence of suicides by juveniles in adult jails is about 8 times that in juvenile detention facilities. Juveniles are at a higher risk for suicide, nearly double that in the community, because, like their adult counterparts, a high percentage of them may be under the influence of alcohol and or street drugs when they are arrested. Many are experiencing the trauma of arrest and incarceration for the first time. Many have a history of mental, emotional, social, and economic problems.
pills,
In addition,
contraband,
juveniles are often
anything
emotionally
that can hide
immature
clothes.
and tend to
When you
act
have an issue.
impulsively. Those serving sentences in state and federal prisons generally have a lower suicide rate because they almost always enter the prison in a sober and detoxed condition. They already have survived the incarceration trauma in the lockup and detention setting. Their emotional and mental problems may already have been given attention. As a correctional worker, it is your responsibility to help prevent suicides in custody. The key to prevention is being able to identify the warning signs. Identifying potentially suicidal offenders before they are incarcerated is critical because most suicides occur in police lockups and jails. And nearly 1/3 of these suicides occur within 3 hours of admission. Experts have identified several warning signs at admission that an individual may be at risk for committing suicide. These signs include first incarceration, accused of a revolting crime, past or current mental illness, under the influence during admission, history of alcohol or drug abuse, significant behavior or mood changes during transport or admission, unusual agitation, particularly in young offenders, high anxiety, such as unusual pacing, yelling, swearing, banging, prior suicide attempts, threats of suicide. If you are involved in the admissions process, you can identify these signs by asking the arresting officer whether he or she heard or saw anything that may indicate potentially suicidal behavior, or whether any significant events occurred during transport. You also can listen to the comments the offender makes and observe his or her behavior. Here is an example of how a juvenile admissions officer got information from the arresting officer, as well as the juvenile, about potential warning signs of suicidal behavior.
Morning, officer.
Morning.
Morning. What's your name?
Brenda.
It's Brenda Wilson.
Yes, Brenda. How are you feeling?
Okay.
Is this your first time at our facility?
Yeah.
Officer, what's Brenda charged with?
Possession of cocaine.
And when did you pick her up?
It's been about 4 hours now.
Okay, officer, would you take off the handcuffs, please? Brenda, my name is Sarah Bartlett. I'm going to be working with you to help you get settled in here. Now, I'd like you to have a seat right there for a minute while I talk to the officer. Officer, how's Brenda been acting since you picked her up?
Well, when I first got her, she bawled like a baby for about a half an hour. And then she got real quiet like this.
Did she say or do anything that would make you think that she might be a problem for us or for herself?
I don't know. When she was crying, she kept saying, "They're going to kill me, they're going to kill me." And I don't know what she meant by that.
Thank you, officer. You've been very helpful.
Sure.
Brenda, I'm ready now. Let's go back to an office so we can talk for a while. Have you eaten any dinner yet?
No.
Are you hungry?
No.
Would you like something to eat?
So, that's what's going on till Monday morning. Is there anything else bothering you right now?
No.
Good. Brenda, I'm going to ask you some personal questions. I ask these same questions of everybody that comes here. I'm asking them because I'm concerned about you. I'd like you to answer them as truthfully as you can because, well, that will help us do what's best for you. Will you do that for me?
I guess so. Yeah.
Good. Are you taking any medication at the present time?
No.
Do you use alcohol?
Sometimes.
Brenda, have you ever tried to hurt yourself or kill yourself?
You mean like suicide?
Yes, like suicide. Have you ever tried it?
No, I never tried it.
Have you ever thought about it?
Well, thought about it a few times, I guess.
I see. How do you think you would do it if you were going to try?
Well, one of my friends almost OD'd on crack. It was an accident, but that's one way I could do it.
Could you get enough crack to OD?
Yeah.
So you could do it if you wanted to. Brenda, why would you want to kill yourself?
Well, I mean, I never said I was really going to do it, right?
No, I know you didn't. But you said you thought about it. And I was just wondering, what's so bad in your life that you would want to end it all?
Well, my life is, it's such a mess now. I mean, it's not worth living anymore.
What's so bad about it?
I don't want to talk about it.
Brenda, do your parents know that you've been doing drugs?
My parents? Did you, please, tell me you didn't call them. Tell me they're not here.
I haven't spoken to them, but I'm sure that they've been told that you're here. They'll probably come soon.
Oh, gosh. Will you just lock me up now and not let them see me? I can't face them like this.
Brenda, the officer who brought you in said that in the squad car you kept saying, "They're going to kill me, they're going to kill me." Was that your parents you meant?
Well, yeah, see, when they find out that I'm here, they're going to kick me out of the house. I know they will. That's what they're going to do. God, just don't let them get me, Mrs. Bartlett.
It's all right, Brenda. It's all right. We won't let anybody hurt you as long as you're here.
As you have just seen, conducting an effective admission screening process is a good way to identify potentially suicidal offenders. Staff should be able to detect potentially suicidal offenders about 90% of the time at admissions. But this doesn't mean offenders don't commit suicide once they're incarcerated. As you learned earlier, suicides do occur in the prison setting. Experts cite two major factors that influence suicidal behavior: the correctional environment and staff attitudes. Once incarcerated, some offenders find incarceration too much to bear. One part of the environment that they have difficulty with is the regimentation. Like many offenders, they are not used to being told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. To them, facility rules and regulations are arbitrary and nonsensical, a way of keeping them under control. Another troublesome part of the environment for some offenders is they believe they have no apparent control over the future. They feel hopeless and helpless in confinement. They feel overwhelmed. Some offenders also have difficulty with the isolation. For them, incarceration is a shocking and traumatic experience. They are deprived of normal access to family and friends, the people that made up their former lives. Then there is the shame of incarceration. First-timers, or persons with a limited arrest history, often have a strong feeling of shame. Misdemeanants, who commit the most suicides, also develop a strong feeling of shame. This group includes arrestees who committed traffic violations or disturbed the peace. In addition, prominent citizens who commit crimes experience strong feelings of shame. The dehumanizing aspects of incarceration are another difficult part of the environment for some offenders. Lack of privacy, restricted living space, and inability to make their own choices can have a devastating effect on some offenders. Fears can heighten some offenders' anxieties. Television, movies, and newspapers can instill fears because of the way they portray prison life. Also, some repeat offenders describe true or exaggerated scenarios that make newly sentenced inmates highly anxious. Another factor that influences suicidal behavior is staff attitudes. Over time, some correctional and healthcare staff become insensitive to what is happening around them. They lose perspective on how arrest and incarceration can affect the emotions of offenders, especially first-time offenders. Insensitive attitudes may cause these staff to overlook signs and symptoms of suicidal behavior, especially when they're dealing with child molesters, rapists, and muggers of elderly women. In addition to insensitivity, some staff have misconceptions about suicide. In a correctional setting, these misconceptions can unintentionally lead to suicides. To be effective in preventing suicides, you must learn what is fact and what is fiction.
People who threaten suicide just want attention. I've always heard that people who threaten it don't do it.
Many suicides occur when staff have ignored suicide threats as being manipulative. Many offenders are manipulators, but many manipulators will kill themselves. In fact, most people who commit suicide have made statements that indicate their intentions. In other words, most people who commit suicide told someone they were going to do it. Research has shown that of any 10 people who kill themselves, 8 have given definite warnings of their suicidal intentions. These warnings may be direct statements, such as, "I'm going to kill myself." Others may be more indirect statements, such as, "You won't have to worry about me anymore," or "You'd be better off without me." Offenders may make these statements in a serious, sarcastic, or even joking manner. They may make these statements to you, to other staff, or even to other offenders. The point is that people planning to commit suicide often talk about their plans and feelings. You should not ignore these signs.
Suicides occur suddenly and without warning. They're impulsive decisions.
Most suicides represent a carefully thought-out strategy for coping with serious personal problems. Studies reveal that the suicidal person gives many clues and warnings about his or her intentions. It is difficult within the correctional environment to attempt suicide on impulse. The offender must carefully plan the best method and time. For example, those planning a suicide will often give away their possessions for several days or weeks prior to the event.
People who have attempted suicide have gotten it out of their system and do not attempt it again.
Four out of 5 people who kill themselves have made at least one prior attempt. If persons have made an attempt on their life, taboos against taking their life have been broken. Other attempts then become easier. Although some attempts may seem minor and merely attention-getting behavior, they are calls for help. If you ignore such calls, other more serious attempts are likely.
You can't stop someone who wants to commit suicide.
Most suicidal people want to be saved. They may not want to die, but at that particular time, they see no other choice.
Asking offenders about suicidal thoughts or actions will cause them to kill themselves. It's best just not to talk about it.
You cannot make people attempt suicide when you show your interest in their welfare. Asking or talking is perceived by many as caring. Feeling that somebody cares will prevent some offenders from attempting suicide.
Thus far, we've examined the admissions process, where most, if not all, potentially suicidal offenders should be identified. Then we looked at how the correctional environment and staff attitudes can influence suicidal behavior. Now we will explore how you can identify incarcerated offenders who are potentially suicidal. A suicide rarely occurs without the appearance of several signs and symptoms. Often, however, only 1 or 2 signs and symptoms will alert you to a potentially suicidal risk. Many of these signs and symptoms are ones that might appear during admission or booking. They include history of mental illness, drug and or alcohol abuse, behavior or mood changes, previous suicide attempts or threats, strong guilt or shame, depression. Of this list, depression is the one we will concentrate on. Depression is the single best indicator of potential suicide. Approximately 70 to 80% of all suicidal individuals are depressed. Many people often confuse the blues with depression. A person who feels sad or down when things are not going well has the blues. Everyone has this feeling from time to time. A person who constantly feels sad and down, though, is experiencing depression. Suicidal offenders commonly have situational or reactive depression related to a negative event. When the situation is resolved, the depression disappears. Clinical, deep-seated, internal, long-term depression occurs in only a small percentage of offenders who attempt suicide. Depressed people see no meaning in life and cannot seem to enjoy anything. Common signs and symptoms of depression can be identified by focusing on an individual's mood, thoughts, and behavior. First, the mood of a depressed person is one of extreme sadness or doom and gloom. He or she may make statements such as, "Life isn't worth it. Things would be better with me gone." He or she may lose interest in activities, in people, in his or her appearance, in food, and in friends. Excessive crying is common, and there may be significant and sudden mood variations. Depressed individuals are generally pessimistic and have strong guilt feelings as well as low self-esteem. They have an inability to go on. Thus, their depression can be heard in the thoughts they express, such as, "I'm no good," or "I'm not worth much." Finally, depression often causes changes in behavior and appearance, such as withdrawal or silence, loss of appetite and weight, sleeping problems, and high anxiety or tenseness. Lethargy or sluggishness, a stupor-like state, is common. Whenever you believe that an offender has any of these signs and symptoms, you should contact your supervisor or appropriate mental health personnel.
Okay, Sarge.
Once offenders are identified as a potential suicide risk, there are things you can do to prevent suicides from occurring. Be aware of the symptoms ordinarily displayed by an offender prior to a suicide attempt. Be tuned into the obvious and sometimes subtle signals that almost every suicidal offender sends out. How effective you will be in preventing suicides often is determined by how well you listen and observe. Be sure to supervise these offenders effectively. 2/3 of suicides occur in isolation. Do not place potentially suicidal offenders in isolation unless they can be constantly supervised. If potentially suicidal offenders are placed in suicide-resistant rooms, they must be supervised every 3 to 4 minutes. If they cannot be constantly supervised, place them with selected and trained cellmates who can contact staff in case of an emergency. Under this condition, staff must supervise potentially suicidal offenders at least every 10 minutes. Finally, be empathetic with offenders and do not judge them. You are responsible for the welfare of those offenders under your supervision, not for judging their moral character. Be understanding of what the offender is going through. And of course, never give up on an offender. If he or she appears to be resisting help, do not be impulsive and withdraw your support. More often than not, an offender's resistance is superficial and will disappear gradually if you continue to be empathetic and helpful. By taking such actions, you may be able to prevent an unnecessary death. Remember, suicides in correctional facilities can be prevented. Let's summarize what we have learned about preventing suicides. The rate of suicide in correctional facilities is high, 2 to 9 times higher than it is in free society. The majority of suicides occur in jails or adult detention facilities, with juvenile facilities and prisons ranking second. When juveniles are detained in jails or adult detention facilities, the suicide rate is 8 times higher than in juvenile facilities. An effective admissions or booking officer can detect about 90% of potential suicides. The correctional environment and staff attitudes can influence offenders' suicidal behavior. Depression is the best indicator of a potential suicide. Every correctional worker plays an important part in preventing suicides.
I know it's hard to believe what a lot of us say, and I know that there are some of us who are just trying to manipulate the system, like getting better housing or just attention. And I know that it's hard to give your compassion to a lot of people who are locked up in here because of what they've done. Despite all of these things, and despite the tough guy attitude that a lot of us show, there are a lot of us who wake up at 2 and 3 in the morning thinking about our lives and what we're missing, like the kid's first day at school or graduation or just being with family and friends. I know I was overwhelmed and wanted to end it all. I didn't kill myself because the staff here recognized my change in behavior and kept a watch on me. You can do the same for those in your facility.